Hello and welcome to the Genuine Learning Blog. My name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about a very unusual event. GAO has issued a technical correction, or I guess a technical update, technically to Yellow Book in between our Yellow Book issuances. So obviously we had our 2011 revision, which was replaced by the 2018 revision, and now we have a 2021 update to that revision. So not frequent that this happens, but they actually went in and modified some of the paragraphs in the 2018 Yellow Book. So we're going to just take a look at what they included in this update. So again, it was done in April 2021, and it is effective upon issuance. Now they are limited. It's only a handful of paragraphs, and they're very targeted, specific responses. But again, it's important to just make sure that people are aware, because especially if you do performance audits, this could be a pretty big deal. So the first thing that we'll notice in 1.02 and 1.03, which are paragraph numbers, you're going to see this concept of equitable added into Yellow Book. So providing service to the public effectively, efficiently, economically, ethically is what we typically had. They've now added and equitably. So we saw some changes in the paragraphing to add this concept of equitable service as well. In addition, you can see it in paragraph 123 or 1.23. where it says determining whether a program provides equitable access to or distribution of public resources within the context of statutory parameters. So this concept of equity really being addressed here. Now, one that I think is really important is paragraph 383. Now, I think 383 literally just had a typo in it, because if you look at all the other prior paragraphs in this section in chapter 3 that address this concept of skills, knowledge, or experience, they are all say skill, knowledge, or experience, with the exception of paragraph 3.83, which had the word skills instead of skills singular, and it had and instead of or. And so to be consistent with the other chapter or other paragraphs in chapter 3, they have fixed that to be skill and then added the or. In addition, there is an amazing flowchart at the end of chapter 3, and that flowchart had the word had the word and so they now have updated to show or. So very important concept here when we're evaluating someone's ability to oversee, right? They don't necessarily have to have all, it's or as part of this. So a major change there for entities who are looking at independence in particular. When we look at paragraph 842, this is in the performance audit area. So for performance audits, they have chapter 8, which focuses on the audit procedures, and then chapter 9 focuses on reporting. You're going to notice a big change here for performance auditors, which is actually consistent with what we historically have done. Prior to this, paragraph 842 had an additional requirement to not just look at the 5 components of internal control, but also the underlying principles. And so they have struck that from the requirements section to assess these principles. But they did add clarifying guidance. It says you can also identify underlying principles, control objectives, or specific controls that are significant to the audit. So performance audits are a little different because we have to look at what controls are relevant and which of the 5 components were relevant, but it used to say and underlying principles. So now it's when we're looking at it a little bit more holistic. You'll also see that verbiage in terms of determining which internal control components, principles, and then they added control objectives and or specific controls are significant. So they're just kind of cleaning up some verbiage here. A lot of celebration happening for performance auditors on that underlying principle, which many felt was going to add a lot of additional time and thought that wouldn't necessarily add a lot of value, especially if they weren't relevant. And then we had some verbiage changes, especially here in paragraph 849. You'll see that it used to say you should assess and document their assessment of the design, implementation, and or operating effectiveness of such control. It now is backed off of that, and it says you should, to the extent as we go through this, to the extent necessary to address the controls, it's been changed to you should plan and perform audit procedures to assess internal controls, and then to the extent necessary to address the audit objective. So they kind of backed off a little bit again on the specifics of it and gave it a little bit more of a, well, what are we going to do in response? When we get into chapter 9, which is performance audit specifically for reporting purposes, you will see some changes in here. Again, this is really a lot of change. So the old to the new is really a bigger deal here. So when reporting on the scope of their work, auditors should identify the scope of internal controls assessed to the extent necessary for report users to reasonably interpret the findings, conclusions, and recommendations. Before it used to say if some, but not all. So they've kind of, when you're reporting on scope, right, make sure that we're clear on what our scope was. Same thing here in reporting. When we're looking at this, if we are looking to see whether these controls are not specifically being addressed, it says auditors may identify the control components, underlying principles, control objectives, or specific controls addressed in describing the scope. You may also identify the level of internal control assessment performed. Control components and underlying principles that are not considered significant to the audit objectives may be identified in the scope if, in the auditor's professional judgment, doing so is necessary to preclude a misunderstanding of the breadth of the conclusion of the audit report. It's very consistent with the concept that was previously there, but a little bit cleaner in terms of what that reporting would look like. So again, unexpected, somewhat celebrated from what I can tell on LinkedIn. So excited to see this out here. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the Yellow Book technical update and that if it does impact you in terms of some of your documentation, hopefully this will help. So thank you guys so much for joining me on the Genuine Learning blog, and I hope to see you on a future blog. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.